first up is Mr. TCA Raghavan, former diplomat, author, former High Commissioner to Pakistan and Singapore, Director General of ICWA and President of the Association of Indian Diplomats, award-winning historian, lots of biographical works, including Circle of Freedom, which is what we're going to talk about today. He writes a lot on history and diplomacy. Thank you, sir. Next, we have Aparna Vaidik. She is a historian, a psychotherapist, professor of history at Ashoka University. She taught at Georgetown University, Delhi University, educated at St. Stephen's, Cambridge, JNU, and has received multiple distinguished grants. Her books include The Imperial Andamans, My Son's Inheritance, and Revolutionaries on Trial. Finally, we have Amit Arora, the festival director of the History Literature Festival. He's an ex-journalist with 20 years of experience at the Times of India, covering elections and policy. He's a co-founder of this festival, loves to weave in historical narratives, and he's also a passionate woodworker, weaving furniture with innovative craftsmanship. Welcome, Amit. I'd like to invite Professor Amar Farooqi to welcome them on stage with a stool. Already. Thank you. Over to you, Amit.
Hello. So we are going to talk about two really amazing books today. These are the stories from the time of Indian independence struggle. I would request Professor Dr. Raghavan to first start by talking about his work, and that will be followed by a small presentation with Aparna's work, and then we can delve deeper into these topics.
Thank you. And may I begin by, first of all, thanking the festival organizers for inviting me for this festival and for organizing this session around my book. I had attended the last session in Pune and enjoyed it greatly, so I'm greatly looking forward to this conversation this evening. So let me very briefly talk a little bit about this book and how I came to write it. May I have the cover on the screen, please? So the book, it wasn't my idea to start with. I was asked by my publisher sometime in 2020 or 2021 to think about a book on the national movement. And I was hesitant because, for two reasons. Firstly, I didn't know what there is possibly new which one could say about the national movement. Everything is so well known. And secondly, it's also a fact that the national movement or the freedom struggle has become decentered in our public life. And this decentering has happened over the last 20, 25 years because of pressure from the left and equally because of pressure from the right. So I was in two minds whether to think about such a book at all, when by chance, may I have the next slide, please? When by chance, the next one, I encountered a letter, I came across a letter from Sarojini Naidu to her son. Sarojini Naidu was then in London in 1912 or 1913, to her son who was in Hyderabad. And Sarojini Naidu talked about her special set in London. And one of the people in the set was this young man, Asif Ali, who was a young man, 22 or 23, just he had just become a lawyer. And he was back in London because he liked living over there and fighting a case which had no future. Next slide. This is Sarojini Naidu. Yeah, this is Sarojini Naidu sometime in 19, so she would have been much younger in 1914. She was then about 32 or 33, and she's writing, she wrote a lot. She was a great letter writer, and this letter was about her special set. So the first was, of course, Asif Ali, and the second was this other young man, Sayyid Hussain. And they all happened to be in London at the same time, 1912, 1913. Sayyid Hussain and Asif Ali are in their early 20s. Sarojini Naidu, by then already a mother of four, a published author, well-known poetess, is in her early 30s. And it struck me that, let me see what happened to this trio, what happens to them, when I also encountered another young man, Sayyid Mahmood. He's standing here with Jawaharlal Nehru, and this photograph dates to the 1920s. But in 1913, 1914, he too was in London. He didn't meet Sarojini Naidu then, he met her later, but he happened to be in London and was part of the crowd which moved around with Asif Ali and Sayyid Hussain. So I had this idea, why don't, and this was a group of friends. By 1916, each of these four, Sarojini Naidu, Sayyid Mahmood, Sayyid Hussain, and Asif Ali formed a kind of a close friendship. I thought, let me see what happens to this friendship over the next 30, 40 years through the story of our freedom struggle, and which is what the book is about. It's a story of friendship. The subtitle is Friendship, Love and Loyalty, because it's about four very vibrant personalities. In time, one more gets added to the list, which is Aruna Asif Ali. Aruna Asif Ali was Aruna Ganguly. When she was 19, she met by chance Asif Ali, who was by then a Congress worker, an upcoming Congress politician without much of a future. He was then 41. She was Aruna Ganguly, and they decided to get married. She was 19. She came from a very well-known Brahmo family, living in Nainital, but originally from Bengal. So as it would be today, a Hindu-Muslim marriage then was a conversation stopper. So my book is about these five people. Sarojini Naidu, Asif Ali, Aruna Asif Ali, Sayyid Hussain, and Sayyid Mahmood. And it's a story of, as I said, friendship, love, and loyalty. In the background is the freedom movement from roughly 1915 till 1947. So there's a certain element, there's a great deal of infatuation, love, some amount of, there's a tragic end, of course, because the freedom struggle, as you all know, is both a story of, it's a story of a great success, but it's also a story of a great failure. So the success is decolonization, the failure is the breakdown of Hindu-Muslim unity. So what happens to this circle of friends through this 40-year period is what I've tried to convey in my book. Thank you very much.
Can we now please switch to Dr. Vaidik's presentation?
Can I stand up because I won't be able to see my own screen? Okay?
Sure, you can.
Mane, I need to see it to be able to talk. Okay? Yeah, is that okay? Yeah, okay. Oh, okay, you're saying I sit down, I see it here. Let me stand. So thank you, organizers. Thank you, Amit. Thank you, Basant Sahab, everyone in the organizing committee for inviting me. And I have a group of my own private audience. Thank you for coming. So I'll quickly tell you about the book. And I'm excited, I was really excited to be on the panel because not only are there overlaps between characters, so Asif Ali appears in my book also, and my hunch about him got proven right when I read his book. And also, he has served in Pakistan. That's where I went and did my research. So there was like life experience overlap also, which is rare. Yeah, okay, so now quickly about my book. So this is the cover. This is like I'm making a sales pitch, so stay with me. And that's, so the book is about this conspiracy trial known as Lahore Conspiracy Case Trial. It ran for 2 years. At the end of the trial, everybody would know, Bhagat Singh, Rajguru, and Sukhdev were hanged. Other people were given sentences of different years. Yeah? So that's the story I'm telling. Now, how did I begin researching on it? So I thought I'll give you a little bit of a process thing instead of just giving you my argument, what's there in the book. So I am pressing. Next slide. बहुत इज्जत का कचरा हो रहा है. Okay, so I found this document in National Archives of India. It's a completely chance discovery, and it's a letter from Hansraj Vora to Mathuradas Thapar. So Hansraj Vora and Mathuradas Thapar, how are they connected? So you know Sukhdev, one of the person. So Sukhdev's full name was Sukhdev Thapar, and Mathuradas Thapar is his brother. So in the 80s, Mathuradas Thapar feels that not enough books have been written about Sukhdev, so let me go out and write one. So he starts connecting back to the surviving revolutionaries. So he writes a letter to, sorry, I don't want the next one. Okay, I'm so sorry. So he writes a letter to Hansraj Vora. Now, Hansraj Vora is a very interesting character. He was living in America at that time, in 1980s, and he's somebody who had testified against his fellow revolutionaries in the court. And Mathuradas writes to him asking him, why did you do it? What were the compelling reasons? Yeah? And when I read the letter, I'm going to show you one portion quickly, what got caught, like how I got trapped. So he says, mine has been most difficult life, full of risks, but so far, touchwood, I have remained unscared. But the memory of the 20s accompanies me doggedly, teasingly, hauntingly. So something had happened at that time. And then he writes this poem, once I had a friend, a leper friend, you could not. So, and that's a tragedy. So it's a highly tragic letter, right? Where he's self-incriminating and he's talking about things, and I'm like, I got goosebumps. And then he says, you know, I hope by the time I die, I would have been fully forgotten. This is my only ambition. And here I am, a historian, wanted to leave my mark on the world. You know, human quest to leave their mark on the world, and this man wants to be forgotten. And after this, I couldn't back off from the project. It just unfolded. And then I kept finding more and more material because I was looking. Yeah? Okay, so the quest then took me to the Prime Minister's Memorial Library, where there are several transcripts of the surviving revolutionaries, and they're called transcripts because the actual interview is not available. So the oral history transcripts, these are what they look like. Some are in English, some are in Hindi. And I found a transcript by Mathuradas himself, in which he's talking about another person, a Punjabi from Firozpur. Yeah? And the person who's being mentioned in this is someone, if this was North India and you were Hindi speakers, you might know the person. His name was Yashpal. So some people will know. He was a famous writer in the progressive movement. His Jhuta Sach is one of the important partition novels and all of that. So he's mentioned, so I find another person, yeah, who has got a dubious sort of a thing associated with him. Then I find more material, yeah, and then I find another book which says Krantivir Chandrasekhar Azad aur unke do gaddar sathi, his two friends who betrayed him. So you see, I'm finding one thing, then I'm finding one thing, and I'm finding one thing, right? So I kept finding more material. And then the quest continues, and I go to Lahore. Yeah, I went 3 times, and I was told that there is material in Lahore, but nobody had seen it. Bhagat Singh's brother had gone, he hadn't seen it. Mathuradas had gone, hadn't seen it. So I knew there was material, but unverified hunch it was. Somebody had given me the tip. I found the material, but I couldn't see it. That's a story you can ask me about in the Q&A. Okay? Now here is what I found. I'll show you some snippets. Do you see that image? Have you ever seen an autopsy report? Okay, somebody has. That's an autopsy of the guy they assassinated. Imagine I find that. You see that? That document in Nastalik, they call it Bhagat Singh's FIR. This is the John Saunders, the guy they had assassinated, so they registered an FIR. So that's the FIR. Over there is a hand sketch of the route that the revolutionaries took to run away, so police sketched it out. This is Bhagat Singh's handwriting. Have you ever seen his handwriting? I'm finding all this material. Can you believe it? I can't stop. Yeah? And this is another handwritten note. I found material and material. Yeah? 3 times I went. Okay? So now I have all this material. And finally, so you see the back is being loaded, the camel's back. And finally, this one broke my back because I found the trial reported. So the trial took place in 2 phases. People haven't written about the first phase at all. And it was daily reported by nearly 15 newspapers. There were pressmen sitting there continuously reporting on the trial. And I find all this, and the Tribune for 3 years, it takes a lot of time to look at these records. So I end up with all this material, and I have to tell the story of the trial. So how do I tell the story? And that's why I put this PowerPoint together, because this is what historians do. We piece together a lot of things, make a narrative. Now, how would you piece together this much material? Yeah, so I drew inspiration from cinema. कुछ नहीं हो पाया तो फिल्मी life में. So, does anybody recognize this film? Rashomon. Some of you educated, erudite people recognize it. So, there is a Japanese filmmaker known as Akira Kurosawa. Mane Japan ka Satyajit Ray. Okay. So, he has made this black and white movie that historians use to, teach various perspective and all that. So in this, there is a murder. And the story of the murder is told from 4 different perspectives. Yeah, and when the movie ends, you're like, ho gaya? Kisne mara? So it's a whodunit that doesn't solve the whodunit. Yeah, but tells you everything, right? So I was like, okay, maybe this is what I can try my hand at. And that's how I have 4 people, 4 narrations in the book. One is the colonial state, the other is the revolutionaries, the renegades, and the press and the public. Yeah, so that's how I pieced together the narrative of the book. So what it fundamentally does is, I know yours is love and friendship and all that. I end up talking a lot about betrayal. Yeah, I talk a lot about sedition. I talk a lot about martyrdom, because these are the voices. So what you get in this is a polyphony. Polyphony is the past speaking in multiple voices. I should stop now. This is not a lecture. So, thank you.
Thank you for that amazing presentation. Right, so now let's dive into these 2 books. Let's start with Dr. Raghavan. Asaf lived a pretty uninteresting life, except for being on the sidelines of something great that was happening. He definitely seemed to have had really interesting relationships, is what I would say. How do you see him? Why did you choose him to be the central character? And books talks a lot about Sarojini Naidu and all other characters, but why is he central?
Well, he's unusual because he's not in the main, he's not in the main frame of the national pantheon. He's not Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Subhash Chandra Bose, Sardar Patel. He's not even Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He's in the 2nd or 3rd rung. And sometimes peripheral characters, tangential characters, they give you a perspective on events which is slightly different. So that's one reason why I liked Asif Ali. But there are other unusual things about him. I keep coming back to this, but the first half of the 20th century is informed by 2 big ideas. One is nationalism, and the second is communalism. Because it is their clash which really defined India as it emerged after 1947, and up to an extent, it defines what we are today. And Asif, as a Muslim, gave me a good perch to look at this, process. And finally, he's not just a Muslim; he's a Muslim married to a Hindu, which again adds more contrast and flavor to the prism through which I look at events. So he, in a sense, provided the narrative frame. There are other reasons too. He's a constitutionalist. His wife turns out to be a revolutionary. In many ways, he's a contrarian thinker. He's constantly coming up with ideas which are not in sync with those of the national leadership. He has a different idea about the kind of federation India should become. So all of that provided to me a certain entry into looking at what happened and also posing questions about what did not happen. Because sometimes as historians it's also good to ask the question, why didn't this happen? So for all those reasons, Asif Ali was a good choice, I think.
Okay, so as you said that he was a constitutionalist, but and he did become part of the Khilafat movement, was totally for it, even though, as he said, he was not really so emotionally tied to, at that point of time, to the idea of Khilafat itself. That there's some, Khalifa in Turkey who's the supreme leader sort of a thing. So this thing keeps coming up again and again. Like he thinks one way, but he still goes on and does certain things because that seems to be the right thing to do.
Well, you see, I mean, when I first encountered Asif as a student in London, he's this very impressionable young man who's totally infatuated with everything the West has to offer. And in fact, after getting his law degree, when he comes back to India, to Delhi, he finds it intolerable. And he just wants, he says himself that I was deeply homesick for London. He goes back to London and meets Sarojini Naidu. And now, for someone like Asif Ali or the other character, Sayyid Hussain or Sayyid Mahmud, someone like Sarojini Naidu they were not prepared for. Nothing in their upbringing, in their social experience, had equipped them to come across a woman like her. She's educated, she's at ease with a wider social network. She wants to have a court around her, and she's an older woman. She's an established poet. She's a mother of four. So very obviously and almost inevitably, each of these three young men falls in love with her. And it's an infatuation, but it passes. But I think because she was herself making such a, she was herself tying herself to the freedom movement, in the process, each of these three young men, who happened to be Muslims incidentally, they also found that a life in the public stage, being associated with the national movement, is something they also aspire towards. And I think that's the reason why he drifted into the Khilafat movement, while he may not have been fully convinced about it, but he saw it as a platform. And while he may not have agreed with every element or part of that platform, it was nevertheless the general direction in which he wanted to go.
So, of course, your book is about the circle of friends, but it also talks in detail, or at least gives a very good picture of the Muslim politics of that time. Also the equation between Hindus and Muslims, how they sort of come together and again drift apart, resulting in partition and all. You want to talk about that part a little?
Well, you see the whole, the entry of Mahatma Gandhi into the freedom struggle and then his adopting the Khilafat program and making it part of the Congress program was really the high point of Hindu-Muslim joint front against imperialism. And after that, it goes steadily down for various reasons, including the role of the British, the internal differences which the Congress was not able to bridge, the fact that Jinnah, who otherwise, Jinnah is also a part of this circle in London, and someone whom Sarojini Naidu and Asif Ali admire greatly, but their differences grow. He goes off into the Muslim League. So the story of the Indian freedom struggle really is intertwined with the Hindu-Muslim question throughout. And Sarojini Naidu, who personally is totally committed to the idea of a joint Hindu-Muslim program, and these three friends of hers, these younger protagonists. For them, it's a journey into a certain amount of disillusionment.
But there's so 2 points. There's certain amount of romanticism in Sarojini Naidu's own attitude about how the Hindu-Muslim unity can come about, and she's aware of that. So, is that something we see often? Is that something we see in personal life also? You think that your personal actions and equations, relationships can actually change how things get done, how history is made?
Well, I would say it's a necessary but not a sufficient condition. I think Sarojini Naidu thought that friendships across the religious divide were essential. And they would be the building block for a political program. As it turned out, she was wrong. But certainly, I would say that she was right in one part of it, that it's a necessary but perhaps not a sufficient condition. And you're right, the Hindu-Muslim aspect forms a large part of the group, of the book, because it tells you about Asif Ali's own relationships with Jawaharlal Nehru, with Sardar Patel, but also Sayyid Mahmood, who's also a very important character. His own relationship with Jawaharlal Nehru, and Sayyid Mahmood, who is an impressionable man. He's first totally infatuated by Sarojini Naidu for about 4 or 5 years, completely in love with her. He's married himself, has children, but he's besotted because he's never met a woman like her before. And thereafter transfers his entire emotional dependence on Jawaharlal Nehru and becomes almost a kind of a shadow of Nehru, except on the question of the policy of the Congress towards Muslims. So these aspects are something which I deal with in my book, but the book itself is not about entirely about the politics of the time. Most of the book is about their friendships, their relationships, and how those relationships change. Aruna Asif Ali, of course, makes a very dramatic entry when she marries Asif Ali, and she introduces a new element into the whole book in the 1940s, because when all of these other people are locked up and are in jail during the Quit India movement, she goes underground and becomes a revolutionary.
I
But
like
that is
that
much later.
sentence. Say that sentence. No, you're the state.
Yes, and she has this famous sentence, because Asif Ali is a sober constitutionalist. This is where it ties up with the other book we are talking about. He is Bhagat Singh's defense lawyer. After Bhagat Singh has hurled 2 bombs into the federal legislature in Delhi and is arrested. He's convicted and executed for a different act, which was
that's a separate case.
That's a separate case, and the police later on linked up these 2 cases. But he's arrested first for throwing these 2 bombs into the federal legislative assembly, and Asif Ali defends him. And he likes Bhagat Singh and B.K. Dutt, and he finds them lovable young men with just the right ideas, but he says they're seriously misguided, because this is not the thing to do. And it introduces this into the book, this other great binary of the first half of the 20th century, which is almost the dialectic between violence and non-violence. And it's something which we continue to debate to this day.
But I was talking about what Aruna Asif Ali says.
Aruna Asif Ali, she's married to this sober constitutionalist who believes in orderly change, and she has become a revolutionary. She's drifted to the left. She's pulling up train tracks, undertaking all kinds of violent activities. And someone asked her about Asif Ali, and her response was a quote from paraphrasing Lenin, that he is the state, I am the revolution.
Yeah, I love that line.
Yeah, I love that line. Aruna Asif Ali, incidentally, is present in the courtroom when Bhagat Singh is first brought for trial.
Yeah.
And at that time, the British have not linked up the fact that they had carried out the assassination of a police officer in Lahore, which is the main thrust in the other book. But when he is brought for trial for throwing these bombs, Aruna Asif Ali was allowed to go in. She's 19 years old, married for 5 months, very impressionable. But she insisted on going, and Asif Ali was able to bring her into the courtroom because he was the defense counsel, and there were not more than 20, 25 people present. It was a small little room inside the jail, and when Bhagat Singh and Rajguru entered the room, they started raising the slogan, Inqilab Zindabad. And Aruna Asif Ali writes that was the first time she had heard the phrase, and she said, I was electrified, and I could never forget it. The slogan, incidentally, was coined by a very well-known Urdu poet of the time, Hazrat Mohani, and it became a kind of a flag,
like a war cry.
Like a war cry during the freedom struggle.
So, coming to you, Aparna, there are 2 questions that I'm trying to ask you, and you can pick and choose which one we start first. One is the Rajguru marginalia, how you came across this, how it added to your research and revelations therein. The other is, of course, the forensic science question out of it. Which one do you want to pick up first?
What do you guys want to hear? Do you want to hear about the sources or you want to hear about forensics? Boring, totally.
Boring.
I know. I thought you will ask me about forensics. Anyway, I'll tell you fun stories about forensics. So I showed you some of the material that I found in the archive. Now, there is one thing I did not tell you about. So, which was again very interesting. So what happens, just to tell you that the Lahore conspiracy case trial takes place over 2 years. And there is a very famous book by A.G. Noorani, the lawyer who's died recently. He's written this book called Trial of Bhagat Singh. But that book also deals with the second half of the trial. And that's the documented part. Yeah? And the documentation for that is in printed form and it's available across the world in different libraries. So everybody, when they think of Bhagat Singh's trial, they think of that particular part of the trial, which was held under a special tribunal. And during that time, the revolutionaries did not go to the jail, they were on hunger strike. Now the hunger strike has been captured by all the movies that you may have seen on Bhagat Singh, right? At least you would have seen one. If you haven't, you're not nationalist enough, okay? Whatever that word means. So, but when I started looking at the trial records, and I was like, wait a minute, it's saying the proceedings volumes for the trial is capturing a summary of a trial that has the trial that has taken place 1 year, for at least 1 year. So where are those records? Yeah, so that ties back to my story about Lahore, of how the quest took me to Lahore. But this copy, so in my mind, and there is a general historiographical understanding, that the revolutionaries did not speak during the trial because they were hunger striking and they were in the jail. They never came to the court. Yeah, so I find this proceedings of the trial, this is for Jaya ma'am from National Archives. I find the proceedings of the trial, I have seen them. Then I see Mathura Das's collection, in which he says, my brother's copy of the proceeding trial in which he had written in green ink in the margins. And I'm like, wait a minute. I did see a copy with some green ink. And I didn't realize that that was Sukhdev's copy. And I went back, I scurried back into the thing, I pulled that copy out and I feverishly started looking at it. It had those jottings, right? Now, some archivist had taken it out of Mathura Das's collection and put it separately. It was miscatalogued. And then an argument with the archivist ensued, and she told me I could go to the director and submit a complaint. You know, all of that, like acting. So I was like, fine, this is not something I need to find, but I knew. So how did Mathura Das get that copy? Now, all the revolutionaries, once they were sentenced, they were given a copy of the proceeding in order to be able to appeal. So everybody had a copy. Yeah, and Sukhdev, being who he was, sat and looked at every page of the copy and kept putting his comments in green ink on the margins. Yeah, and in one place he says, this is wrong. That evidence is wrong. This is a false witness. No, Bhagat Singh was supposed to fire, but M fired. Yeah, this was a message. So he is speaking. right? So here, there was a revolutionary speaking in the records. And I was like, gosh, I've hit a gold mine, man. Like, ab to life ban gaya. Like, I've got this record that no one's seen, right? So that was one very big find of the revolutionary talking, and that's come to be. But then later I realized this, it's in the market already. Like, somebody's taken out that record and published it, and it's called Sukhdev's Marginal Era. So that's the record that Amit found interesting, so I'm telling you about it. Then forensics story batao ek to.
I think you should talk about that.
Yeah, I
bit
know,
of
I know.
detail.
Nobody picked forensics, but you see, forensics is very fascinating. Okay, I'll tell you two things, and then you will also might think it's fascinating. So, what makes forensics fascinating? Because forensics is not seen as a science at this point in time. Forensics acquires a status of a science as many witnesses, scientists, different kinds of science people, practitioners of science are invited into these trials to give testimony. So this is a science that is actually getting manufactured not in the lab, but in the courts, in the trials. Yeah, so I'll give you one example of another trial, famous historical trial, about that later. But what are the policemen doing? When they catch the revolutionaries, what is the first thing that they pick up from a crime scene? I know many of you, you watch crime shows, right? People collect all sorts of evidence, right? What are the police picking up when they go to these crime scenes or these dens, revolutionary
Bullet
dens?
shells.
Huh?
Bullet shells.
Bullet shells. Huh? Fingerprints, okay. Fingerprint nahi, tab itni jaldi nahi hota hai. Okay. Hmm? Clothes they are wearing. Why? Because blood stains. Wow. I'm loving the imagination, yeah. So, so they pick up it to look for the dhobi's mark on it. Okay, you remember, if any one of you remembers in the earlier times when the dhobi used to be washerman, you would take away clothes, like white clothes, they would put a mark on the top and the collar inside, right? They would look for the dhobi's mark because the dhobi's mark would lead them to the locality where the dhobi was, and he would be able to tell whose clothes they are. Okay, so that was them tracking. Or what they would do is, like when they caught these revolutionaries, they would take their fingernails because fingernails would have chemicals in them. If they're making bombs, then the chemicals would be there. And then the fingernails would be sent for, the clippings would be sent for forensics. Yeah? And how do you do gun ka forensic, pistol ka? Upar se you will say fingerprints, right? But actually it's the bullets, where you put the bullets because you're going to put them with your hands. So that will have, the bullet thing will have fingerprints. Yeah? So forensics was fascinating. And it is like when they threw the bomb at Delhi Assembly, they're caught. But 4 months back, they had assassinated this guy. So it's only through forensics is the police able to tie up 4, 5 different cases in which these guys were involved. And therefore, the trial came to be known as conspiracy. Yeah, it's not just like ek crime ke liye, assassination, murder ke liye, John Saunders ke murder ke liye case hua. No, it's not like that. It's a conspiracy because it's multiple crimes. And when one crime is connected to the other, to not crimes in the sense, in the colonial, in the archival language. I'm not saying that they were criminals. Like, don't get me wrong there. So, because I was talking about forensics. So, the idea is that we have found out 5. How do we know it's not 7? And that's the nature of conspiracy. It always leaves the state guessing how much was there. Yeah? So that's why all the cases involving the revolutionaries were known as conspiracy cases. So yeah, that's the...
That brings me to my next question. You list some close to 24 other conspiracy cases. Like people generally just know about Bhagat Singh, Chandrasekhar. These are the names people generally know about.
Yeah.
But there were revolutionaries in almost all geographical locations.
Yeah.
Could you just talk a little bit about that?
Okay. So you see, Lahore conspiracy case is not just, it's the most written about and the most famous, infamous, so to say, but there were at least 10, 15 conspiracy cases. So each time the revolutionaries were caught, so the first one becomes the Chapekar brothers in, Pune, and then you have the Bengal revolutionaries, and there are elsewhere, there are several, these cases, but each time the revolutionaries are caught, it's a conspiracy case. And that, as I was saying about the term conspiracy, so, how is the law defining it? How does the law define a conspiracy? So conspiracy fundamentally has 2-3 things in it. One is that there is more than one person or more than two people involved. Because two people decided to do something. Yeah, there is a covenant to commit something. Now, something was committed or not is not important. The covenant, the agreement to commit the crime or to do something, that is important. And suppose you and I agreed, like Raghavan Saab and I agree, and then I go ahead and do it and he doesn't do it, but still he would be culpable because he had agreed. So a conspiracy crime is also an uncommitted imagined crime. So when you are dealing with revolutionaries, you really don't know what the scale is. Yeah, you don't know how much they have done. You managed to find out 2 things, but they could have done 5 things. Yeah, you found 2 bomb factories, but there could be 10 out there. Yeah, so it's also got to do with the state which is highly paranoid. Yeah, which is constantly scared. Is there an information failure? And there were, like, 1857 was one of the biggest information failures in history. Yeah, they failed to understand that this is a revolution brewing. Like revolution money, like uprising, popular mass rebellion going to happen. They failed to find that out. So, and that had engendered this kind of fear, yeah, that we really don't know what we are sitting on. And whenever it came to the people who are using violence, the case came to be known as conspiracy case. An imagined, uncommitted imagined crime. That's what a conspiracy was. That you don't know what the scale is. Yeah, so it was one of the many.
Yeah. Right. Dr. Raghavan, you mentioned about the binary of violence and non-violence. So, recent times there have been debate if there was no INA or naval mutiny, it probably would not have gotten freedom for maybe another 20, 50, whatever years. Do you want to talk about that in a bit of detail?
Well, Asaf Ali, of course, was the defense counsel for Bhagat Singh. Later, he was one of the defending defense counsel in the famous INA trial in the Red Fort, when the 3 officers of the INA were tried by the British government, and finally the case was abandoned. And although they were convicted, the conviction was not implemented. And Aruna Asaf Ali was, as I said, she became a revolutionary. In 1946, she is pardoned, and happens to be in Mumbai at the time of the naval mutiny, the naval ratings mutiny. And she almost became one of the leaders, but was dissuaded from doing so by Jawaharlal Nehru and others. But she, in her view, this insistence on non-violence was a big mistake. For Asaf Ali, of course, the violent route was being completely misguided. And to some extent, this difference between husband and wife also constitutes 2 different points of view. The point of view that acts of such as that of establishing the INA or the naval mutiny, or acts of terrorism such as those of Bhagat Singh, for a long time, the view in India was that these were contrarian trends and actually didn't play a major role in the final eviction of the British. But in the last 10, 15 years, the revisionist perspective has gathered much more traction. And there is this critique of Gandhian nationalism, and the view is that it was, in fact, the naval ratings mutiny, and it was, in fact, the INA, which were the push factors which led to, finally, decolonization in India. Now, one can have different perspectives on this, depending on where you wish to position yourself. But certainly, Asaf Ali and others disapproved very, very strongly of acts of violence. They thought that these were meaningless symbolic gestures and were entirely counterproductive.
Right, so these revolutionists get called misguided youth as soon as the news about the throwing of bombs in the assemblies out. So from that, how did Bhagat Singh and these people became the cult that they are today?
Okay, so first I want to respond to what he said.
Yeah, please, please.
Yeah. So, in my mind, I don't think the binary of violence and non-violence is a binary. in that way. So who was funding Bhagat Singh's group? When they were short of, these guys were young men, always short of money. Who do you think they went to? They went to Motilal Nehru. Motilal Nehru used to constantly give them money. That, who's that famous guy in Lahore? Many of these leaders were giving them money. कि यार लड़के हैं भूखे मर रहे हैं इनको कुछ वो होगा तो वो पैसे से वो बम बना रहे हैं या खाना खा रहे हैं that's different, right? So I'm just saying that one could be opposed to the idea of the bomb, but one could still be supportive of the youth because there is something common to all of them, which is a fight for Swaraj. And maybe because I've been looking at what people call violence for a long time, I do feel like there is, when you're taught in school, nationalist, like the story of freedom struggle, you're taught the Montemurlo, Minto, okay, I get it. I just like my tongue twisted, okay? Minto Morley reforms, then you have Montague Chelmsford reform, you have the 1935 Act, and then you have 47 and the making of the Constitution. Okay? That's the, like all of you knew, the way you piped up to correct me, right? Now, the same story I can tell through the story of the conspiracy cases. It's parallelly running to the constitutional development. So, and you can't wish it away. Yeah, but I feel that somewhere it got wished away by the very national movement when we come to 1935. Now, this Jawaharlal Nehru and Motilal Nehru, Jawaharlal Nehru is one of the, like the most loudest advocates of these young men. Yeah, but the tone completely changes when we come to 1935, elections are held, and the Congress makes the ministries. Yeah, they come to power, and they have made, in several provinces in India, Congress has come to power, and they've joined the assemblies. Yeah, immediately, there is a shift in the attitude of Congress, because now they're seeing these people as a nuisance. That if they're in the jail, let them be in the jail, they'll come out and do faltu ka sloganeering, let them sit there. Yeah, and like earlier, it was so easy to raise money, like chanda for these people, for the defense committee of the, but after 1935, it becomes difficult. So I feel that there is a setting aside of the revolutionaries, their legacy, and the idea that of violence being somehow okay because all of us are working towards the independence. Everybody is going towards Swaraj. That is set aside. And I feel that that continues in the historiography because even our historiography and our historians, there is a class and a caste element to our historiography. Most historians are upper caste and upper class, coming from backgrounds where they may not have received the stick from the state. So we write histories of cultural nationalism, cultural mobilization, Bengal Renaissance. We are talking about all of that a lot. Then comes 9/11 in 2001, right? And from that time, there's a burst of sort of writings about colonial violence and torture, histories of torture. So in last 10 years, there are so many books on that. So how come we were not writing about violence earlier and we are writing about it now? So I feel there is a contextual element to this historiographical writing also. That coming out of partition violence, we felt we should not be talking about violence all the time in writing, documenting histories. So it is not because somebody is ideologically predisposed not to write about violence. It's because partition's violence and this kind of setting aside of beginning to see that we are going to take the constitutional path. And yeah, so somehow in this India becoming a republic, this idea of non-violence gets enshrined as the state principle. Yeah, directive principle of state policy, so to say. Yeah, and that continues, and we kept paying homage to that, right? And it took something drastic to happen. And the way we wrote about violence was spectacular violence. So, Jallianwala Bagh par kitabein hain, right? On the Kuka rebellion, there will be books. Yeah, so violence came to be seen as something that the colonial state did in spectacular movements, it not being a state of things. It's only in last 15 years that historiography is saying, nahi, wo ubiquitous hai, banal hai, everyday hai. Yeah, in the Englishmen, the planters, the businessmen in India, the way they're treating the servants is violent. Yeah, they started talking about the law as being violent in itself. So, yeah.
Well, I agree that history writing always has a context, But I don't, first of all, I don't think it had anything to do with the class background of the people
Historians?
involved. Of the people involved. I think
Okay.
the revolutionaries were as much upper caste as the
Yeah,
Congress,
certainly.
freedom fighters were. So there was no class distinction there. I think the context is provided by the critique of the Congress, which has become stronger in the last 15, 20 years. I think that's part of the context. But the other half is what I said right at the beginning, that the national movement as a whole has got decentered because of pressures both from the left and from the right. The left also disapproved strongly of the enshrining of the idea of nonviolence because they thought it was privileging something which didn't require to be privileged that much because as you say, they saw that violence was endemic through the first half of the 20th century. There was no need to de-emphasize it. It was there in every peasant movement. It was there in all trade union actions. So why are we making a big thing out of non-violence? But the fact is that non-violence was certainly a central motive of the freedom struggle. It may not have defined the freedom movement entirely, but at critical points it did. And secondly, it constructed a narrative force against which the colonial state found itself on the defensive. I think that was the tactical element in the non-violent aspect, which really was something which nobody talks about it, but it certainly was there.
So, interesting thing there, I think, is also be it Shaheen Bagh protest and TCA protest that somebody was talking about in earlier session, or the farmers' protest. You don't see Gandhiji's photo there. You see Bhagat Singh's photo. How did that happen? I mean, these are people who are using non-violent methods of protest and using somebody who was a revolutionary.
Absolutely.
How did that come to? And I don't know if that has something to do with the left or the right politics or policy in recent times, but how did that iconography change is what I'm interested in.
So my argument is it doesn't change. It's coexisting. You see, for the British also, it's convenient to hold up Gandhi vis-a-vis the violence of the revolutionaries. So it's not that non-violence in itself, in and of itself, carried that great an imprint on people's mind. It was also something the British were saying, okay, let's go with this. So like I found this one cartoon in Punch, you know, that satire magazine that used to come out of London. So in that, Lord Linlithgow, who's the guy, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correct. You guys would know that better than me. So he's an eagle, and the revolutionaries are represented as a snake, right? So Linlithgow is picking up the snake and crushing it by its hood, right? Now that, and repeatedly in the records, they will say that if you want to crush these people, we have Gandhi. So I feel that there is a sanctifying of that. And this is not me coming from any kind of ideological position to say, no, that, but just describing a historical process, that somewhere even the British also find it easier to deal with Gandhi in some ways than to deal with these guys. Because these guys are surreptitious, they're underground, they are very hard, they're peripatetic, they're moving from one place to another. They're very hard to catch. Yeah, and they will use something, they will use a device like bomb and destroy things. So, and then they panic about information failure. So I feel that the state is also more comfortable dealing with Gandhi.
Well, that was the left critique, that Bhagat Singh was a socialist and a communist, and the government would always find it easier to deal with the Congress, which was centrist, than to do with left-wing revolutionaries. I mean, this was the traditional critique of the Communist Party of the Congress. And Bhagat Singh certainly was important in that context because he was very clearly a self-proclaimed socialist and communist.
Okay.
That aspect of his thought is, of course, underplayed.
I feel
greatly.
that that's also a post-colonial construct. Bhagat Singh as a communist is, again, I feel a post-colonial construct that, yeah, because he's not really saying anywhere that I am a communist. In fact, the communist movement shuns him. They want to join HSRA, his party wants to join hands with the communists in Calcutta, and they say, ये बच्चे हैं, इनका क्या है, कल के लड़के हैं, इनसे क्या हाथ हम लोग. So that's their view, of these young men. So, yeah.
This
Anyway,
is,
yeah.
of course, I have a lot of...
You can never agree on any aspect.
Agree to agree agreeably, disagree agreeably.
Wonderful example of it, right?
Yeah.
So I have a lot of questions, but I think so do the audience. So let's start the audience question part, please.
So, there was a question he asked that I didn't answer. Shall I, in the time you guys decide who wants to? I'll quickly answer that. So Amit had asked me, how do they go from being perceived as misguided to becoming martyrs? Yeah, so, and that's also interesting. I think that feedbacks to what he and I were talking about violence and non-violence. And that's actually, I'm going to give you data for your this thing only. It supports what you were saying. That they are indeed, at the time they throw the bomb in the assembly, they are indeed, there's a widespread condemnation of these young men. It's that they're pushing the wheel of history before its time, they don't know what they're doing, and they're completely misguided youth and all of that. But then something happens between that time to the time they're hanged that they come to be seen as martyrs. And that is the way the trial unfolds. The trial is happening in full public view. And these guys are continuously giving out statements. And they use the court as a theater to stage their revolutionary ideas. तो अभी जनता को educate कैसे करेंगे? Like bomb का recipe कहीं लिखा नहीं होता है. Like आज तो internet पे आप Google करेंगे तो मिल जाएगा. Yeah, but how is it being transferred, right? So many of these Calcutta revolutionaries, Bengali revolutionaries, actually go to Russia to get trained there. They come back having memorized the recipe of the bomb, right? So you actually need these Bengal revolutionaries to make the bomb. So Bhagat Singh goes and connects with them, gets one of them to come and teach everyone how to do it, right? And bomb is important because the gunpowder, pistols and all are very expensive, and it'll become, there's an arms act, so you can't use them freely. They're only available in certain places, they're very expensive, and the gunpowder will become wet because of the tropical climate. Yeah, so the bomb is more effective, it will make more noise. Now, they are going to be hanged. Somewhere they realize that we are not going to come out of this alive. So let us give all the information to the public. So in the court, they would ask the renegades, do you know how to make a bomb? Yeah? So, of course I know how to make a bomb. And then they will reveal the recipe. And all the press people sitting in the press gallery will quickly go and report it the next day in the newspaper. Yeah? So these guys are actually using the court as a platform, as a vehicle of propaganda, because they're following the Russian, this Bakunin and Kropotkin and other sort of famous socialists and communists who are, talking about propaganda by deed. Yeah, that's a particular idea, revolutionary idea that they're adhering to. So that's what they start doing. And the public perception starts shifting. You see, even at the time they're hanged, people think that they haven't committed this crime. They have been wrongly accused of it. It's only once they're hanged, they find a letter by Sukhdev and all, they realize, okay, something else was happening here. So this idea builds up, that these are innocent young men and they're being wrongly accused. And look at them fighting a good battle for Swaraj. Yeah? So in the end, they come to be perceived as revolutionaries without violence. They're revolutionaries, but the violence is on the part of the state because state is the one killing them. They're not the ones killing. So that think of violence shifts, the burden shifts. So they come, okay, they are martyrs. Look, they died. I mean, yeah, so that's how this idea of them being actually non-violent gets, generated in public mind.
Yeah. Please ask.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Meenu. My question is for the entire panel, actually, because we were talking about the common idea of Indian freedom movement, and with regard to Shahid Bhagat Singh and his contribution as well. So this is a very general question, and general to some context also kind of silences an unseen part of history or social movement. But my question is, when we talk of the revolutionary freedom fighters or freedom fighters in general, there is a constant struggle of the political parties in the present day to give them colors. Now when the Badal government comes to power, whenever Bhagat Singh is portrayed in the paintings there, it's an orange turban. And when the farmers protest at the Singhu border, the color is yellow.
Or blue.
So, yeah. So, and then there's a constant change when the Delhi CM takes power. Recently, the paintings of both Ambedkar and Bhagat Singh ji were removed from the backdrop. So what are we contesting with? Where are we contesting at? And there is this normalization of the idea, okay, so when this party comes to power, these people get removed from our understanding of the larger narrative. And when this party comes to power, certain people become heroes with regard to how the Rajasthan government looked into how Aurangzeb was portrayed in the state government syllabus textbooks and how, other things happen. So what should we do as students, as researchers? I kind of reiterate this in different contexts with regard to the political party in power, or should we understand the nuances carefully with regard to whatever is being spoken? Because Satwinder just came out with this text, I literally found the text very close to my understanding of Bhagat Singh and his contribution, titled as Bhagat Singh, A Life in Revolution, published by Viking and Penguin together. So, ma'am, your take on this, sir, your take on this, as to how we normalize and study leaders in context of the times we are in, and how to not normalize certain political situations and uprisings.
Easy question, so you can answer.
He has a career in foreign service. This is classic example of a diplomat. Why don't you? You haven't answered it.
The question has not been posed to me.
Yeah, it's your turn. Yeah, it's to entire panel.
Look, I think that's why we need to read history, attend more such events, so that we understand the nuances, right? Why there are wars around history narratives? Because that lets you control the information that you want to put out, how you want to portray a particular personality from history. You can pick any time, any thought, any image, and use it. That's for you to know what did these people actually stood for. What were their ideas? What were their thoughts?
Yeah, so the version of past that I hold up, how is it serving me? Because all of us do that. We hold up versions of past. So, and that's what I'm connecting this back to what I said about polyphony. Yeah, that past is fundamentally polyphonic. Yeah. Now some theorists, your students, so you would know Bakhtin, like Mikhail Bakhtin. He talks about polyphony. Now, what is polyphony? That one is lots of characters speaking in a novel. The other is, but all of them are speaking what I want them to speak. But polyphony is when there is a character that challenges the authorial voice also. Right? And that is true polyphony, where characters acquire a voice of their own, and sometimes they'll speak in a voice that you do not want or you do not like. And for me, encountering those letters was like that, because here was a renegade, right? And there were 3 men who died because of not entirely his testimony, but a testimony that he gave. But as I read, I realized that his voice also needs to be represented. Yeah, and he was not the only one who testified. So to remember that the past is polyphonic, and it will speak to us in ways that we do not like, we do not appreciate, right? But to account for all the voices. Yeah, that would be my answer. More philosophical, but yeah.
Well, I agree with what both said, but in my view, this has nothing to do with the past. It's all about the present. And you can see one drama, for instance, unfolding in the United States presently, when, if you remember 4 years ago, there was this famous disputed transition, when a mob attacked the Capitol on the 6th of January, and thereafter there were prolonged cases, and many of the people were convicted to years in prison. And after the current presidential election, Trump has pardoned all of them. And there's a narrative that they were being victimized by the state. So in a sense, these debates are not about the past. They're about present differences. And it's easy to say that they're about the past, when in fact what they are pointing to is your current polarizations, and we have to be aware of those polarizations. And are those polarizations informed by the past? To some extent, yes, but not everything. We don't have to be teleological or trace everything back to the past, but see the present for what it is.
Yeah, because there is an assumption in that question that all past flows into the present, right? But not all past does. There are some rivulets that go and find some other path and not come into our present also. So to not think of past and present as an ever-flowing river. There are ruptures. Yeah.
Yeah, my question is an addendum to her question and also a continuation of the answers that all three of you gave. Amit mentioned, so for this purpose you study history. So, but what do we study? The history that we studied in school has been touted as the leftist version of what the facts were, and the history that is being rewritten in the last, few years or maybe a decade, is touted as the rightist version of the history. So, what do we study then? Where do we get the realistic picture of what could have happened and how it would have happened?
Well, in my view, I think what we study or what we should be studying is not so much the version you are getting, but what we should be studying is a method. And that method is of how do you critically approach the past. You know, it's what a really good teacher teaches is a process of critical inquiry, so that the student knows which are the right questions to ask. And if the student knows which are the right questions to ask, you know, the left version or the right version will recede in importance. So I think that what is important is the methodology which we are adopting to study the past, because what they will be in textbooks will always be contested. You know, it's something that you can't change. All over the world there is a debate about what school textbooks and college textbooks will contain. So there will never be a consensus on this. That will keep changing. What is important is the critical inquiry, the spirit of critical thinking. If that is present, then the rest actually becomes less important.
Yeah, so my answer would be that this idea that the earlier history was leftist is also a rightist view. Yeah, because therein lies a rejection and a dismissal. Yeah, instead of looking at the contextualization. Now, we are coming out of, your parents, sir, might have lived through partition. I don't know how it was in Bangalore, but in North India, in several parts, there was a lot of bloodshed, right? So that's the context for a lot of writing. We are coming out of that bloodshed. Now you tell me, if I'm teaching history in university, irrespective of whatever my ideological thing is, how do I teach histories of hate without instilling hate in my students' hearts? That is my job, right? To talk about, okay, temple destruction happened, then mosque destruction happened and all that. One choice is not to teach it. The other is to teach it, but teach it in a way that it doesn't make you go and do the same thing, right? So that is the social responsibility that historians have, which people who, these days everybody is a photographer because Instagram is there. Everybody is a writer because of Facebook. Everybody is a historian because of these lit fests, right? But I'm talking about professional historians. We carry social responsibility. Yeah, and that's what distinguishes us from other historians. We can't just write anything, right? So that is one. The other is the element of power. When we are writing, we write to persuade, right? So is the historian upholding the state power, the power of the elite, or is the historian's narrative contesting something? Yeah? So that is also part of our social responsibility, not to always uphold the structures. Soviet Union produced a lot of history, yeah, to uphold its purges. Is my job that? No, but everybody else out there who calls themselves historians, they are doing that. So there is a very big difference between a professional historians and And left, ये left historians हैं, this is a way of dismissal. So I would beg you not to dismiss that scholarship.
Maybe one last question. I know lots of hands, right? So
He wants to respond to the question.
let's give a really young person who wants to ask a question, but I can't see who's young or who's old out here. Okay, maybe the hand raised here since it's been raised here as the last question.
A very good evening to everybody here. My name is Sarita. I'm a storyteller from Mumbai, and I'm the curator of something called Heritage Stories in Performing Arts. We've been sharing around 50 stories of freedom fighters, ma'am, over the last 4 years through various performing art forms. And one of the thing that I realized as a curator, as these stories were researched, and we did have the families of storytellers, of the freedom fighters come on our show as well, was for the teller to keep away their personal thought process while narrating the story as it happened. So somewhere or the other, the interpretation of the individual who shares the story comes into the picture. So ma'am and sir, how difficult or easy was it for you to stop yourself from putting in your personal thought process as per, vis-a-vis given the data or the facts that you came across? I'm not sure if my question is...
Yeah, this is the question about bias. We always get it. How do we set aside our biases?
Thank you.
So, do anyone, come on, you have to rescue. Like we have 2 professors of history, retired professors sitting there. Maybe let them also join they may say something. I can always respond, but it'll be nice to hear them also.
I am a retired professor, but once a professor, you don't retire. We agree on that also. You don't get tired. That is the other indication. So I have been pulled out, the senior person to respond to this question. In the history literature combination festival itself, it raises the old question whether history is and literature is a form of literature and all that we are going. So that means the first response I would like to tell the gentleman who raised the question is, nature of discipline is not constant, as in the case of any other discipline. It has been changing. We have gone through that. The second that I would like to say, facts are not sacrosanct. That is the real answer. And as someone put it, it is neither the fault of Adam nor the fault of Eve, it is the fault of the fruit. Sometimes that's the problem. So the sounds and silences that has been reflecting, people have been writing history at different points of time. Maybe the sources were not available to them, something else has come up later. Then the real question is appropriation of the images. That has also got something to do the political opportunity that these parties have to stay in power. Whatever is in consonance of that particular narrative, it will be there. If it doesn't comply with it, it will be removed. It will be temporary. It will come back.
In the context of this discussion about revolutionaries and the attitude of the Congress towards the revolutionaries, I think, as Raghavan Sahab has shown in his book and also talking to us, I think, their responses were really very complex. And here is Asif Ali, who's a constitutionalist, but he defends Bhagat Singh in 2 trials, and this is not because he's a lawyer and he's in need of a case. These are political decisions. It's a political decision to be part of the judicial process, both the INA trial, and then they might have disagreed. There were disagreements with Subhash Bose. There were disagreements on the question of the formation of the INA, but the Congress formed an entire team of very eminent lawyers and from Bhulabhai Desai to so these are political decisions really, and we really need to sort of think about why they should be also interested in making a political statement about their defending legally these people with whom they might have disagreements over tactics, over strategy.
In the interest of time, we'll have to conclude this session right now. Thank you so much for an absolutely brilliant session.